Joining us now, Professor Andrew Latham, Senior Kondratieва, Olenia Tregub, and Nicholas Stugen. Thank you all very much for being with us. Professor Latham, let me come to you first. Do you think that this is essentially a first up hardline bargaining position by Moscow? Do you think that ultimately they may come down?
No, I don't actually. Whether it's a ceasefire, which would be 30-day, very temporary, or a longer-term peace settlement, there are no incentives on the Russian side to go along with this. They're winning on the battlefield. They're about to pinch off the Kursk salient. They're winning in Donetsk and Luhansk. The pace is better than glacial, but it's very real. And I think Putin has a sense that a ceasefire would just give the Ukrainians a chance to dig in and maybe to rearm, and he has no incentive to go along with that. And then when you think about the longer term issues, things that would have to underpin an actual peace settlement, there's simply no way in which Vladimir Putin is going to go along with President Zelensky's basic requirements. He's not going to give Putin is not going to give territory back. In fact, he wants more. He's not going to, he wants it to be acknowledged in international law formally that these are part of the Russian Federation, Donetsk and Luhansk and a few other bits and pieces here and there. He wants no possibility of Ukraine joining NATO. But even beyond that, he doesn't want any NATO boots on the ground, the British and the French, talking about a reassurance presence, backed up. The backstop is the technical term that's been used these days by the United States. He's not going to go along with any of that. And given the incentive structure right now, why would he? He's winning the war. And I'm not a fan of Vladimir Putin. I'm just reporting what I see.
Yep. Nicholas Nugent, do you believe that a resumption of hostilities, not a resumption, but perhaps an escalation of hostilities might actually be in the offing if this entire process falls through the cracks?
Well, I agree very much with Professor Latham. I didn't think there was any prospect of Putin agreeing to this ceasefire, which has come out of nowhere or has been hatched between the Americans and the Ukrainians. And now we see that there isn't those prospects. We're not even seeing an offer of bargaining. But I think those of us before Mr. Putin spoke were just of the view that he hadn't got what he wanted. As Professor Latham says, he's winning the war, or at least he's not losing it. I mean, he may not be advancing very fast, but he's certainly not losing the war, and he hasn't got what he wants. He wants territory. And even the offer, which probably would have arisen out of talks that Russia would hold on to what it's got at the moment, I mean, that's not even being talked about. So I don't know where we go from there. Indeed, the question on my mind now is about specifically America-Russia relations, because this deal was hatched by America. We understood that President Trump and President Putin had a conversation, but they seem to be far apart. So what's going to happen next? What will President Trump, what will his next move be? A mystery. I mean, I don't see where this is going. I don't see the beginnings of the end of the war. I don't see a solution. The right people are not talking to the right people yet. It's all being rather indirect. So yes, I'm rather pessimistic about it, I'm afraid.
Senior Kondratiev, as a Russian journalist, a senior RT editor, thanks, Senior, for being with us. Could it be argued that Russia has or disagrees with the ceasefire because, and it's been stated, that it gives, according to Russia, a chance for Ukraine to possibly rearm, right? Whereas what Russia is looking for is a lasting peace. Assuming that I'm correct in what I say, could it be argued that Russia doesn't want this 30-day ceasefire? Russia could be looking for an agreement, negotiations for something much more lasting right away.
Well, it was expected because Kremlin has stated the same much before the 30-day ceasefire was proposed. You can check numerous statements where Russia says no short-term or freezing the conflict on the lines of control. You know, that's not going to work for Russia because what the officials said, Russia is looking to address for the root causes of the issue of the conflict to be addressed. And frankly, when we see what has been agreed, if we analyze the statements from Kyiv, from Washington, except the 30-day ceasefire, how are the causes being addressed? There is no clear plan, it seems, on the part of Americans of how to resolve the conflict. So I think it was very expected, and the first reactions, unofficial reactions that we saw from Moscow yesterday clearly said that Russia will not agree to that. And today we got the first official reaction. Now the question is where it will be taken. I definitely think that Russia is at least happy with the fact that some talks are on, that the American side is ready to listen, which is definitely a shift in a 3-year long conflict. But there is a sense of mistrust because, again, there is lack of understanding what exactly Americans propose. I think Moscow considers the Trump administration as very transactional. So I think this lack of trust is something that has to be breached. And as other esteemed co-panelists said, it's not a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Russia and US have to first have their relations to somehow start moving somewhere, and then it will come to Ukraine as well. So I think we have to see it's very unclear at the moment. And as we speak, US envoy is probably meeting or about to meet Vladimir Putin. It will be a closed-door meeting. So we have to wait for the outcomes.
Yeah. Olenia, where does this leave Ukraine presently?
Well, right now the ball in Russia's court, as we may say, because look, Ukraine demonstrated that we want peace, and this 30-day ceasefire, it was a test to see whether Russia wants peace or not. Russia was spreading propaganda all over the world that they just want peace, but in reality they are aggressive nation who doesn't want just to take territory. I want to correct Professor. They want to destroy our independent nation of Ukraine, the whole state. And this is why, of course, they don't want peace. But now Donald Trump, if this is true, and this will be the result of the meeting in Moscow now, Donald Trump will have to respond. What kind of pressure he can do on Russia, because he was claiming that he has some negotiations with Russia that he knows, and this is secret, and it's a slap in the face if Russia will say no. So I am actually surprised if Russia would say no directly.
Professor Latham, what about European partners of Ukraine? If Russia doesn't accept this, and if America doesn't keep up its war effort in quite the same way, then Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and perhaps Italy need to come to the table in a much bigger way when it comes to industrially building weapons, transferring it to Ukraine, and supporting their effort. Do you think that time, in terms of the time needed for that to happen, at the scale at which it's required, that seems very difficult?
If Ukraine had 10 or 15 or 20 years, maybe the Brits and the French and the Italians and the Germans could step up and reconstitute the defense industrial bases that they dismantled at the end of the Cold War. But Ukraine doesn't have 5, 10, or 15 or 20 years to wait for them. The only partner that it has that is half reliable is the United States. And the United States, under President Trump, has indicated, Trump's strategy in all of this was childish. On the one hand, he browbeat, pressurized President Zelensky, embarrassed him in the Oval Office, paused American military aid, suspended intelligence sharing, and all the rest of it. It was a full court press, really, to get President Zelensky to just concede everything, at least in terms of the 30-day ceasefire. Meanwhile, he's trying to seduce President Putin. There's no similar pressures being applied. It was like to President Putin, get on Team Trump, and all kinds of good things might happen in the future. And of course, President Putin is a cagey character, and he realized that he could manipulate Trump and buy time so that he could continue his building on the battlefield momentum, which is going to lead to Ukrainian forces collapsing well before the Germans and the French and the British can do anything to prevent that from happening. I'm not optimistic.
Nicholas Nugent, it just seems that the entire momentum in the war is now decidedly moving against Ukraine. Even in Kursk, we've seen Russian forces regroup and push back Ukrainian forces. Are we essentially looking at a situation where Ukraine itself might need to move for peace, because militarily they are possibly being defeated, if not immediately, then perhaps in the months ahead?
Well, I think you could regard this as Ukraine moving for peace, admittedly with their arm twisted by the United States, but that's what arose out of the Riyadh talks, was that Ukraine effectively was offering a 30-day ceasefire, which seemed to be potentially the start of a suing for peace. And it hasn't got anywhere. So where are we now? I don't know what's going to happen next. I mean, this situation is so fluid, it's day by day. But what we're not seeing is any real prospects for the talks that should surely precede any agreement on peace. You're not getting the two parties talking to each other. You're only getting this rather indirect diplomacy with the United States taking the lead. And so far, it hasn't got anywhere. I don't know where the next move is coming from. As I indicated earlier, I'm waiting to see America's reaction to Mr. Putin's statement today, because they were the ones who were. It's President Trump who's been suing for peace effectively on behalf of the others, and it hasn't so far got anywhere. I'm amongst those who hope that it will, hope that we get somewhere, but we can't really talk about peacekeeping forces and who's going to arm who when we're in this rather volatile situation of not really knowing where it's coming from. I mean, everybody would agree that it's high time a peace was agreed. And we may be right in concluding that Ukraine is more desperate for peace than Russia. As was indicated earlier, President Trump dropped a hint that he felt Russia was pretty keen as well. But we're not seeing that. So whatever this secret information Mr. Trump has, that the Russians also don't have much choice but to go for peace, we're not seeing that. Yeah. So, this is a day-by-day situation, and probably we'll be talking differently in a couple of days. But we had a degree of optimism after the Riyadh talks a couple of days ago, and that seems to have been dissipated. So I don't know where this is going, and I don't know who's going to take the next move. But Ukraine clearly is desperate to end the war. Russia apparently is not desperate to end the war. And that's the situation we're in. And that does not make for a good atmosphere for peace talks.
Olena, realistically, what are the options that Kyiv has at this stage? America isn't going to fuel your war effort indefinitely. Ukraine's biggest problem is the loss of manpower at this stage. You don't have as many soldiers as Russia does. That's a fact. And they've got soldiers coming in from North Korea as well, tens of thousands of them. Your European partners have been talking, but there is no realistic prospect of them putting boots on the ground in Ukraine. This being the scenario, what are Volodymyr Zelensky's options?
Well, I want to say that America is not fueling our war. Ukrainian people are fueling our war, our desire to defend our country. This is what's fueling the war. We are fighting to survive and preserve the country, and this is what Ukraine will keep doing. 1/3 of our weapons is made inside Ukraine. We have 400 new drone companies. We are looking for financing to increase this production so that we need less people on the front line and more technology to protect from the Russians. We now have 7-kilometer zone at the front line where we have mines, where we have drones, where we keep Russians at bay. And this is what we'll keep doing. We just need more assistance, financial, from Europe, from other partners in the world that can help replace American. But Ukrainians pay their own money for the war. Everybody pay tax. We have huge different charity funds and so on. So we will fuel our war effort for a while, for sure. The nation is very much determined on that.
Senior, the other way, of course, of looking at it is that the Russian forces have suffered hundreds of thousands of soldiers dead. There's been a massive loss of hardware which has taken place as well. And while you may be in a position to outlast the Ukrainians, it would come at a massive expense with or without the same level of American support. Doesn't it make sense now for Russia to get into a lasting peace scenario rather than get a situation where America puts in more sanctions and potentially keeps arming Ukraine, even if it is for the immediate future?
Well, let's be clear that if there was no support for Ukraine, no Western support, and particularly US support in the past 3 years, the war could have stopped long back. And that's not just the military support, it's also the, let's put it this way, diplomatic support, because I would remind everyone that 2 months or 3 months in April 2022, there were talks between Russians and Ukrainians in Istanbul, and peace was possible. It never happened, and the involvement of UK and other Western advisors to Ukraine is well documented in the Western press, not in the Russian press. But responding to your question, first of all, I would say that right now we're just getting news that Vladimir Putin made a statement that Russia in principle agrees for a ceasefire, but there are nuances. So you have to check the statement. It's just coming right now in the wires. Russia, as I said, there is mistrust. There is mistrust onto Americans and Europeans because, again, we had all these meaningless Minsk agreements that didn't lead anywhere, and that, as Western leaders stated themselves, were used just to arm Ukraine. So this is something that is not, Russia will not do this again. It will be very careful. So I suggest let's not speculate, since the statements are already coming, and let's look into those statements and see where it's going.
Let me just get a couple of reactions, because I've got the news that you're talking about. Just 3 minutes back or so, Vladimir Putin has said that he agrees to stop fighting in Ukraine, but it should lead to a long-standing peace. So that's changed our discourse a little bit, Professor Latham. This is what he said. This is breaking news coming in right now. And these are his words. I mean, this is what he said in Russian, that he's agreed to stop fighting, but it should lead to a long-standing peace. Is this not a step forward?
No, it's an attempt to manipulate Donald Trump again. I'm sure at one level, President Putin would like peace. But he doesn't want to be ostracized on the world stage any more than he currently is. And so to have Vladimir Zelensky agree to a 30-day ceasefire and him outright reject a 30-day ceasefire further marginalizes Russia on the diplomatic stage. So he's not going to do that outright. But the conditionality is really important, that this ceasefire, whatever it looks like, has to lead to a permanent peace. And that's the rub right there. That's where it all falls apart, because there are irreconcilable differences between Ukraine and Russia with respect, minimally, to Donetsk and Luhansk and the land bridge from Crimea, etc. All of that. We don't even have to agree on the ultimate, whether this is an imperial project or a defensive project on the Russian part. We don't need to agree on that. What we need to understand is that there are irreconcilable differences. And I know Trump thinks he is the master of the art of the deal, but he is way out of his league here.
All right, so let's see what finally happens. I take your position that this may not necessarily be a bargaining position, but the ceasefire seems to be a non-starter at the moment. But, there's not very much new in what Putin says in saying that he wants a long-standing peace. That's been Russia's position. The question is, how does one get there? No clear answers so far, but let's see as this story develops. Thank you all very much for being with us.